Okay, if I can ask everyone to take a seat, please. Okay, it is now 11:10, and so I resume the hearing. As I promised before the break, I'm going to take a rather large step back from the detail that we have just been considering. But just before I do that, it has been brought to my attention that Mr. Merritt has been indicating for some time that he'd like to make a comment, which I understand is about the statement of common ground. Apologies, Mr. Merritt. I can only say that you have fooled me by sitting on this side of the room today. I simply didn't see your nameplate go up. So please, Mr. Merritt.
Thank you very much. It was really two questions on the statement of common ground and the changes that are indicated by it. The first was in terms of Miss Cook's contribution in terms of the Phase 1 park and ride. I just wanted to be clear about that, because looking at the diagram, were you referring to the link from the university to the proposed A64 junction? Because it appears to refer to Phase 1 on the plan, but surely that's not going to do anything until the actual A64 junction is there.
I fear that's a question that requires you to look at the plan, perhaps, to...
Yes. Yes, unfortunately, I didn't write down the page number when you gave it.
It's electronic page 67 of the 120.
Is this figure 1?
Yes, sir.
That's Phase 1. That's Phase 2. Yeah, that's one. That's Phase 1.
I think he's got the... Which is Phase 1? Which is Phase 2?
So you'll see the purple links and the reference to the P&R bus extension Phase 2, which, if I understood you correctly, you're saying we're going to be Phase 1 now. But
No.
Right, okay.
No, my correction related to the green, which is the proposed cycle link, which starts off in ST15 and goes northwards along Long Lane, Common Lane. That's what I was referring to.
My notes were that you referred to both the common lane and the park and ride. So that's not correct. Anyway, accept that.
I think that there are two separate things here. If you look at the right-hand side of that plan, do you see the area, the blue, the P&R bus extension? That's what I was referring to.
Thank you.
That's part of Phase 1.
Right, thank you very much. Right, my second question on detail was to understand the change that the council is proposing in terms of the education provision, the primary, and deleting the specific references to the 2 primary schools. Can I understand, is the implication of that the council's anticipating that there might be long-term use of primary schools not on the site to accommodate the primary school demand from this site? Because at the moment, the existing policy in effect...
Sorry, I can't really hear, Councillor, Mr. Merritt.
Sorry, apologies, I was facing the inspector rather than the mic. Sorry, I wanted to clarify the reasons for the council deleting the reference to the 2 primary school provision on the site, which is obviously essential in terms of, local access and the rest of it, and whether there is an intention behind this to make greater use of off-site primary school provision to service this site.
So can I come back on that point? We're not deleting it in its entirety with regard to the primary provision. We're simply saying that it's to be on site, and we're making that clear, but on the basis that our evidence demonstrates that the demand for these schools arises far later in the plan period, and therefore there's some uncertainty around the exact requirements. It's, in our view, not necessary to specify what we understand at the moment to be the form entries that were or have been agreed and tested, but we don't, as Mr. Elvin had pointed out, find it necessary to put them in the policy specifically.
I would anticipate on this point that once the planning application were to be submitted, on determining that, there would either be a planning condition or perhaps a legal agreement which ties down the timing of the delivery of the new school provision.
Agreed entirely, and perhaps even had a review clause within there somewhere to ensure that further changes, were they necessary, could be made.
And the reference to off-site contributions was not in relation to the primary school?
No, that's correct.
Might it be possible to tighten up the wording to give a bit more reassurance on some of that, please?
We think the wording's sufficient already. The point is that, as I made in response to the promoters, and as Ms Bartle's just made clear, whilst that assessment appears to be accurate for today's date, we need to review it to see what the requirement is. It might be greater, it might be less at the date when the planning application is determined. So we need to keep it more flexible, though we recognise the current assessment says what it says, but that may not be the case in several years' time.
Yeah, it seems to me that there are 2 areas of uncertainty here. One, the precise requirement in terms of, likely pupil numbers, and also the precise timing. But that would be resolved through the planning application process, and hence that matter would remain within the council's control.
Yes, agreed.
If that helps. I'm not saying, Mr. Merritt, that I'm not going to look at the proposed wording, because I am. Okay then, as promised then, to more fundamental issues in terms of the soundness of the proposed allocation in principle. Is anyone here this morning to tell me that this site should not be in the plan? Go on, Mr. Laverack, you got in first.
Thank you, sir. I am the chairman of Elvington Parish Council, of which this site affects the greatest. The council appreciates the need for a large number of houses to satisfy the perceived housing need of the city, but we don't believe that CYC exhausted all other options prior to deciding on a garden village in the proposed location. The planners state urban sprawl as a reason to locate ST13 as a freestanding settlement, even though a report prepared by Sheffield University for CYC in 2000 stated that significant areas of land adjacent to the existing edge of the built-up area could be developed not only without causing harm to the character and setting of York, but bring about a positive visual and to the character and setting. This appears to be ignored by CYC as a single site located as far from the centre as possible is easier to deliver than looking to infill non-developed land within the ring road, of which there is a good supply, as evidenced by the density analysis map produced by CYC, document CYC 59A. The A64 ring road will provide a hard physical barrier to prevent urban sprawl and development within the open countryside. CYC are further proposing sites in areas they look to discount here, i.e. adjacent to existing urban areas and adjacent to the outer ring road, namely ST7 and ST14 respectively. Originally, ST15 was planned to be adjacent to the A64, but as time has moved on, the site has been pushed further and further away from the city and away from the 64 and into open countryside on the pretence that this will maintain views and the rural setting. Not for Elvington it won't, obviously just for the people of Heslington and Fulford, although this will have the exact opposite for Elvington. Ironically, the original location for ST15 is not shown within the provided documentations, naming document CYC 59G. It is simply ignored. ST15 now sits adjacent to the village of Elvington, partially in the open countryside and partially on the former Elvington airfield, which is a site of importance for nature conservation for birds. CYC document ST103, the heritage topic paper, seems to have been completely ignored, and I quote, "The high concentration of airfields within the York area provides large expanses of openness with an otherwise hedged landscape. Many of the runways are still present. Elvington now has an uncommon grassland habitat and birds, and because of its open nature on poorer soils, airfields such as Elvington provide a link to the green infrastructure as it connects Derwent Vale to Heslington Tilmere and in return to the golf course on Heslington Common and then to the Warngate Stray, in very close proximity to the historic core. Yet here we are looking to dig it up." CYC state exceptional reasons in deciding on the proposed site, given that the sustainability appraisal prepared for CYC highlighted that the site would have significant negative environmental impacts on 4 of the stated objectives and minor harm on 2 of the objectives, but these appear to be glossed over in favour of the only significant positive benefit being the ability to deliver housing. The idea of mitigation is widely used to reduce the harm in CYC documents, but why mitigate the loss when you can avoid the loss completely by moving ST15? All this at the expense of a sink site for birds and the general biodiversity of the area, including the lower Derwent Valley SSI, which lies 3 kilometres away. Not forgetting the loss of a majority of the airfield, which would take away a popular tourist destination, which happens to be used regularly and add to the attractiveness and the economy of the city.
Sorry, if I can ask you just to pause there. Sorry, I was being distracted by the bleeping noise.
Okay.
My apologies.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Our worry is that Elvington and ST15 will become one conurbation with no real buffer between them. Suburban sprawl, not urban sprawl. The other issue is transport, and I know that last night's new statement dealt with that to some degree, although we are surprised to see no account have been taken of any transport links between Elvington and ST15 and East Riding. I know a lot of people in Elvington work in East Riding, but nothing has been taken into account of that. All the traffic flow has been sent towards York, and between ST15 Elvington and Hull and Pocklington, there is no control junction. So I'm not sure what modelling has been made for ST15 going to East Riding, because it doesn't seem any account of that whatsoever. The recent sustainable transport study produced by the Wood Group for CYC states that none of the key locations in the city are accessible on foot within 30 minutes from ST15. And realistically, only the University and Science Park as employment centres are accessible by bike within 30 minutes. Further, the study states that only 10% of the journeys will be made on foot or on bike, the remainder being by vehicles. A not particularly sustainable location to site 3,339 houses. The proposal is to connect the site to the road network via the A64 by means of a new junction and the B1228. It's also been added today that the applicants believe that 1,000 houses could be served in phase 1 from the current B1228. Now, I'm not sure how many people live in Elvington here, but certainly the 2 people either side of me do. On in the morning, you can't get onto the A79 and the B1228 because of traffic built up. So add 1,000 houses onto that, then I'm not sure what the traffic's going to be like. And putting in an extra junction to Elvington Lane while closing the existing one, putting actually, rather than 1 traffic light between that and Grimston Bar, 2 traffic lights, I think will have very interesting consequences. It is not difficult to perceive the extra traffic will have problems. Likewise, the A64 itself, especially in summer, backs up regularly at the Malton Road junction, all the way back to Grimston Bar. No one has produced a coherent plan to deal with this, and if the site is allocated, then the new junction to the A64 must be primary to the building of the houses, not secondary. I think the developers need to put their hands in their pockets if they're actually going to build this. That's the end of my statement. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. Mrs. Kinder.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. I just looked on the York City website earlier this week, and they talk about when they put a new settlement in place, seeing that it's capable of being delivered, including provision for infrastructure. And in the annual reviews of infrastructure funding statement, the feedback into the reviews of plans to ensure plans are delivered. Should issues arise affecting delivery of the strategy, then the York City Council to look at alternative strategies. And I would ask that in this policy, if it does go forward, that they put something in place as to what their alternative strategies will be on non-delivery, monitoring of delivery and non-delivery, because if you leave the junction of the A64 in phase 2, there is a worry that it will never happen and the settlement will just grow and continue to use the B1228, which, as my colleague has mentioned, has got issues already. We've also approached the York City Council about trying to stop the HGVs coming down the 1228, and we've been told that they have vital access to businesses. So it's not just Elvington, it's all the little villages below us, all the way down to Howden. They say that, we've been told by York City Council that they need that access, not using the 1079, because there are businesses. So it's a two-way traffic. It's not just up in the morning or back home in the morning. It's during the day already. It's a big issue. So that's why there is a big concern that that junction on the A64 should be in phase 1 if this is going to go ahead. It might be easier to move the whole site closer to the A64 anyway, to encourage this garden city. And I have a reference if the council are interested in that original document. I saw on their website, but I'm sure they know where it is.
Hopefully it's a garden village and not a garden city.
Okay. It feels like a city to us because it's at least the size of Poplington. And they have mentioned in earlier the discussions with the solicitor that the minimum should be 3,339 houses. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bramley.
Thank you, sir. I object completely to this site because it seems to demand such a high level of mitigation. 470 acres of good agricultural land is going to be stripped and will not produce food anymore. And I think food security should be an important consideration when making planning decisions, especially at the moment when there's a serious doubt on food security, and it's getting less and less every year. My other concern is the cycle pedestrian link to Common Lane, Long Lane and Langwith Stray. This is a single track road, 2 metres wide in areas, and if all the cyclists and pedestrians are allowed to go on there, we won't be able to carry out our businesses easily. We'll be seriously impeded, and so will Langwith Fishing Lakes and all the residents down that lane, because plans by Sustrans to actually narrow the road so people don't overtake cyclists and provide passing places every 150 metres. This would probably mean that we would have to wait forever until there's a clear way to go, because cyclists apparently don't give way to cars. The other thing is the recreational disturbance will be caused by making this link to the Tilmire and the possibility of introducing links to Fordlands Road and Forest Way, which are at the other side of the Tilmire, which is part of the Minster Way. Sorry, I've had a few scribblings out with the new information that's coming, so I can't read it very well. Yeah, another main concern is the link road to the A64, the new one that goes across. It used to cross the OS10, the mitigation area, but because they've reduced it by 40 or 50 acres now, it's apparently on the edge of it now, on the edge of the mitigation area. But it goes through two areas of woodland, one of them probably the ancient woodland, that will be partially destroyed on its way to the A64 grade separated junction. No mention of mitigation for all this damage done has ever been mentioned. And introducing this as a measure, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, didn't give the parish enough time to consideration and react. We just haven't been given enough time to react to all this dense information that's been given to us. I mean, the original response from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and the Natural England was that mitigation should have been put in 5 years before commencement. We're here today that they've removed this, apparently. I don't know what the evidence to remove it is. Yeah, there's just one more point. Yeah, as well, it's chopping up the airfield right next to a sink site, in effect turning it into a quarry to create the grade separated junction. All the scarlets there, once they've disappeared, they aren't going to come back again when the mitigation's in place. They're just going to disappear. It's going to be destroyed completely. And stripping all the soil off good agricultural land in OS10 and then make it in wetland buffers on areas that I've created in a high-level stewardship scheme, restored all the hedges and created wildlife strips on it. And the areas of woodland add to this benefit in hedges and field margins. It's in quite good condition at the moment, maybe not to Peak's ecology's views, but I think it's in quite good condition, and we've managed that for 15 years in conjunction with Natural England, and it's in quite good condition. And to plough it all in and strip it seems just terrible, as well as the loss of food production from it. I think the suggestion from Quad as well, that they're going to give new occupants a 1 year's subscription to the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, seems to trivialise the whole scheme. I don't think they take it seriously. I don't think they've ever visited this land. I think that's all at the moment, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bramley. Mrs. Hilton.
Thank you. I'd like to echo really what Mr. Bramley said, and I'd like to pick up on paragraph 0.7 in SS13, which says there's going to be a barrier to the movement of people and animals onto the SSI. I'm very unclear about this because at the moment there is a bridleway running on the Heslington length and the Fulford length of the SSI. It includes the Minster Way, and there's also a bridleway across the top of the SSI at the bottom end of the golf course. So it's very unclear. Is there going to be a barrier to prevent people and domestic animals entering the SSI or not? And if there's not, I think we have the kind of problem that Mr. Elvin was talking about in relation to matter 5, Strensel, just on Thursday. Mr. Elvin said on Thursday, we need to be able to conclude beyond scientific doubt that there'll be no adverse effect. And where inadequate data for predicting adverse effects exists, one should assume a worst-case scenario. Well, I've been pulling together some data. We expect a huge population change, and if that big population is allowed to enter the lanes that currently are a dead end leading towards the Tilmire, the Triple SI, we've got a huge increase in potential number of visitors. So if you want the figures, I can give you the figures, but the bottom line is we're talking about 100% increase in population with ST15 plus some additional student accommodation on the campuses. And then if we add into the lanes a cycle route from Elvington and from Weldrake, possibly there will be from further afield villages as well, we're talking about a further increase of almost another 100%. So as I say, I have the figures if you would like them. So we're talking about not a 9% increase in footfall as was rejected for Strensall Common, but a probably 180, 200% increase. And perhaps more, given that ST15 is far closer to the Tilmire than Heslington and Fulford, and given that there's an active encouragement for people to walk and cycle on the lanes that lead there. So I would request that the whole idea of a cycle route along those lanes be reconsidered. It will have unintended consequences. It will bring, as I've said, a great increased ingress onto the Triple SI. The use of it by motorised traffic, such as motorcycles, cannot be prevented. And Sustrans confirmed that in their discussions with us. So it's likely to, far from protecting Heslington Village from traffic coming through, it's likely to increase it. Because if I'm a motorcyclist in Weldrake and I want to get to York, and I accept not all motorcyclists want to go in that direction, but say I am, I'm going to avoid Grimston Bar and go on the very nice country routes across fields and across lanes, rather than go round a difficult junction. So it won't have the desired effect of reducing traffic through Heslington. Moreover, I see in the statement of common ground that it is intended that there will be bird hides set up for observation on OS 10. That will bring perhaps foot and cycle traffic, but equally car traffic. Where are they going to park? We had a small taste of increased pedestrian and cycle traffic during the pandemic lockdown, and we did have a few near misses at that time. Drivers going at 30 miles an hour on a road that has a 60 mile an hour limit were being actively flagged to slow down by pedestrians in the middle of the road. There were unsafe cycling, there was near misses between cars and cyclists and between farm traffic and cyclists. The farm traffic is very big and very heavy. It takes up a lot of space. There's nowhere for cyclists to quickly escape to because the verges are extremely high. So you can't just wheel off the lane. And cyclists and pedestrians too don't really take on board the stopping distance of very large, heavy farm traffic. We've put all our concerns repeatedly, but I would suggest, sir, that there's only probably 2 people in this room who both drive and cycle on those lanes, and we are the people who are saying it needs to be looked at again for safety. There are alternative routes which haven't really been explored, and I'm guessing that's because You look at a map, you see the lanes, they're a ready-made solution. But they will, in fact, need an awful lot of expense to make them suitable and safe, and to ensure that existing residents and businesses are not harmed. So it might be worth actually considering some of the other alternatives that have been suggested and see if there's actually an off-road route that can be provided so that we don't accidentally harm the Tilmire, harm Heslington Village, and indeed harm cyclists and pedestrians or car drivers and farmers and other businesses who currently use the lanes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gallery.
Thank you, sir. I agree with my colleagues here that this is completely in the wrong place, the proposal, and I'd like to speak about tourism and its value to the City of York. I'm a tourism consultant. I've been chairman of Visit York. I'm on the Business Visits and Events Partnership group nationally and look after their research element of their work. And tourism's actually currently worth £765 million to the City of York. It attracts 8.4 million people. It supports 24,000 jobs. The Yorkshire Air Museum, next to the airfield, attracts around 60,000 visitors a year. And York Maze, also adjacent to the proposed site, attracts 3,000 visitors a day when it is open. York's jointly stated ambition between the City Council and Visit York and Make It York is to double the value of the visitor economy to 1 billion, creating another 2,000 jobs. It's all about customers, and there will be different approaches for each market segment, it says. They want to tackle seasonality, encourage more business visitors to conferences and meetings, extend the length of stay, both business and leisure customers, increase the spend of domestic day and staying visitors, and to increase overseas leisure and business visitors. Elvington is part of the tourism economy, Elvington Airfield, and it's one of the most popular airfield locations for events, track days, driving experiences, plus other kinds of shows. There are 8 events taking place between March and April this year by just one organisation alone. It has a historic significance. It will remove an amenity if this is used, such as the airfield. Once it's gone, it will never be replaced. It may not be York Minster, but it is still an important part of the mix of York's tourism attractions in and around the city. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Are you indicating, Mr. Corsier? Oh, yeah, you just moved slightly away from your nameplate. Mr. Corsier.
Thank you, sir. Your matters, issues and questions broke this question down into a number of parts. Do you want to deal with them all in one, sir? Because it will be quite a lengthy submission otherwise, if I do. It's a matter for yourself, because you broke it down into issues of green belt, nature conservation, viability and deliverability, as well as other reasons, sir.
Yeah, I think if you break it down, that's probably going to be helpful for me.
But do you want me to deal with all those matters now, sir? Or are we going to return to them later?
What's going to be easiest for the council in terms of handling a reply?
I think I'd prefer Mr. Corsier to say what he has to say.
So I will do whichever way suits yourself.
Yeah, that's fine. Given that the council is content to hear it all at once, then I'll take it that way.
So I'm just frightened that I'm just concerned that some of the points early on will not, anyway. So can I take you, obviously, I'm not going to repeat phases 1 and 2, sir, but just to remind you that this is, of course, the need for new settlement is driven by the housing needs assessment, and particularly that of 650 jobs. And so that is obviously a matter which is beginning to look extremely doubtful given the current economic conditions, which are likely to be lasting for at least several years. So I could just make that point, sir. The second point I'd make, just in context, is, of course, when you are looking at harm here, sir, caused by the new settlement, I would remind you, you have to place that into the weighing balance which you need to undertake under MPPF paragraph 14, of whether housing needs should be met in full. So those are opening points, sir. And I really would ask that you re-look at the 650 jobs before the end of the end of the hearing, sir, because that's clearly, sir, evidence has moved on since phase 2. So, sir, turning to the merits of this individual site, I'll go first of all to spatial strategy, sir, and what the plan itself says. And sir, if I could ask you to look at pages 26 to, I think it's 31 of the submitted local plan, and I'm going to refer to text which hasn't been subject to any proposed modifications.
It is quite refreshing to actually look at the plan itself. Thank you
sir.
for the opportunity, Mr. Crossley.
So I would obviously ask you to look at what policy SS1 says that we have the 2 requirements for employment and housing. Then you see, sir, the location development through the plan will be guided by the following spatial principles. And so we went through these at various phases, so I won't go through that again. And of course, there's reference there to locally significant, the city's character and setting, and internationally, nationally and locally significant nature conservation sites, green corridors, and areas with an important recreation function. And so turning over the page to page 27, we have the now factors which shape growth. We first of all have the housing, the various housing and employment needs set out. You then, sir, deal with the character and setting and figure 3.1, which I won't go into today. That's more for ST27 than today. But then, sir, very importantly, to green infrastructure, nature conservation, green corridors, and open space. You see the bottom, the last sentence in paragraph 36, so which deals with, which says, for this reason, internationally, nationally, and locally significant nature conservation sites, and that's is SINCs, the locally significant nature conservation sites, along with appropriate buffers, will be excluded when considering future development locations, shown in figure 3.2 above. And so when you look at figure 3.2, you'll see that the site of ST15 is within a SINC shown on that plan. And so then we follow to 3.7, where we say, which deals with green corridors. And so if you again look at figure 3.2, you'll see that the ST15 falls wholly within a green corridor, which actually it doesn't not shown here, but it's of district-wide importance. And it says 3.7 that there are identified green corridors, and it is important that any development does not have a significant adverse effect on green corridors. This will need to account of their characteristics and reason behind their initial designation. So we have this section of the plan, which is meant to guide where allocations are made. And we have a specific statement in that section which says that allocations that sinks will be excluded when considering future development locations. You also have a clear statement saying that you'll need to take into account the function of green corridors. They are seen important enough to form part of this scene-setting policy that you'll give great weight to them in identifying future allocations. So just to remind you, you have absolutely no evidence, just pick up this point, you have absolutely no evidence about the effect of ST15 on the Green Corridor. So we say that the effect of this is that the SD15, as is put to you, is in contradiction to another part of the local plan. And there's a fundamental contradiction because obviously this is the part of the plan is meant to guide where future allocations are made. So I'll come on to whether I think it's GI2 is relevant, sir, because when I deal with the sink question, but there's a fundamental contradiction within the plan which we say goes to soundness. So one may wonder how this fundamental contradiction arises if the councillors wish to use a site selection exercise which is meant to take these factors into account. And so we say that is quite easily noticed when you look at the site selection document, and so this is, I think, a matter we discussed in phase 2. The council has basically, one looks at these environmental constraints within figures 3.1, 3.2. You exclude sites, but then the council has an option within the site selection exercise to, without giving any reasons, then to include a site, to put it back into consideration. But so we think that is not consistent with the plan itself and what the plan itself says. So just dealing with sustainability, first of all, whether this is going to, so unless I can help you any further on that point, dealing with the question of whether this is going to be a sustainable new settlement. And so I would actually, first of all, just ask you to look at paragraph 52 of the MPPF. And so it makes quite clear that obviously the council should consider bringing forward garden villages, but paragraph 52 makes absolutely clear that if they do so, they need to be working with the support of their communities. That isn't the LPA, it refers to the LPA should be working, so it's distinction there, sir. And it's quite clear the fact that the 3 parish councils most affected by this are not supporting this proposal. And indeed, sir, you'll have noted, I think, reference from all the parish councils on how they have been effectively excluded from any effective discussion about this proposal. So we say, just on those terms itself, ST15 is contrary to national policy. So in terms of in terms of sustainability, what is actually being proposed is a settlement of around 3,300 dwellings, which will have extremely limited facilities, little more than a few basic shops and services such as a hairdresser, and maybe, just maybe, a small branch GP surgery. There will be very little employment. We don't know, so when even these basic services are going to be provided. And experience tends to show that there will be if they are ever provided, it will be late in the phasing. And so this goes back to the viability issue. There is no intention that the developer should help fund the provision of those facilities. It will be a purely commercial decision as and when they are to be provided. So again, the primary school won't be provided, and as I understand it, even on the latest figures, until 2031-32, after I think it's 340 dwellings. So up till then, so this will be, almost certainly will be houses set in the open countryside without any facilities, or indeed any facilities whatsoever. And that's that may be 5 years, it could be much, we think it is likely to be much longer. But I'll go on to that, sir. And it appears to be highly unlikely on the evidence that a secondary school will ever be provided. So everything else, all residents of this new settlement all other facilities will need to be accessed off-site. And that will inevitably mean being within the main urban area. So we have looked at CYC 89, which is now the sustainable travel document put in by CYC. Obviously not to the level we would have wanted to do, but we have actually looked at it, sir. What we do note there is the conclusion in that document that walking, except for trips within the new settlement, is not viable for method for residents to access facilities in the urban area. So we also note from that document that the bulk of the main urban area of York is also outside normal cycling distance, including the city centre, including the railway station. The only large attractor potentially is the University of York, not the other universities or colleges. And so on that basis, CYC 89 concludes that only about 5% of trips will be by cycle. So in terms of bus, we say that the bus travel is unlikely to be attractive until the Great Separated Junction is provided, because of just the length of distance we're talking about and the fact that there will not, as we understand the documentation, there will not be a direct route to the city centre. It's just simply the length of the journey and need to change buses to get to the city centre, which will make it unattractive. And we look at CYC 89, and itself doesn't actually provide any evidence about what likely bus usage is. It simply repeats the assertion of the plan that, or the aspiration of the plan, that up to 15% or more of journeys would be by bus. It doesn't actually give any evidence that that level is going to be achieved. And so CYC 89 concludes that 74% of all trips from this new settlement is going to be by private car. That is remarkably high, sir. And does not show the type of sustainable new settlement which one would hope we would be providing in this era. And so our conclusion is that what you will have is a car-dependent dormitory settlement for York. So there is, if I touch on a point of detail, there is this, I'm not certain which document, I think it's in CYC 89, but it's also repeated in other documents, that the modelling has shown that 25% of all trips from ST15 will be, external trips will be to the University of York. So logic, I'm not certain how that figure can possibly be right if you think about it, because that includes shopping, school trips. Basically, it would mean that a very substantial proportion of the residents would be working at the University of York. Indeed, a very substantial proportion of the employees of University of York would live in the settlement. So it doesn't bear scrutiny. Unless the intention with SC15 should be for purpose-built student housing. I don't think anybody's actually proposed that. But that actually undermines much of the figures casts doubt on some of the figures in CYC 89. It shows that probably car use is likely to be even higher. So I don't want to deal with traffic and air quality impacts because I think you've indicated, because that is based upon cumulative information, that will be dealt with at the Phase 4 hearings.
That's right.
So can I just then go to Greenbelt? So there are two separate matters here. One is the impact of the effect of the allocation itself on the Greenbelt. And secondly, sir, is the impact of the off-site road infrastructure on the Greenbelt. So it might be helpful, because obviously this is meant to be an examination into the council's evidence. If I could ask you to look at CYC 59.6, which is their latest appraisal of Greenbelt purposes in relation to this site. Sorry, Mr. Elvin, I didn't catch that.
You said 59.6, did you mean 59G?
59G, sorry, yeah. I apologise. And so it would also help you, sir, if you could actually also keep a finger in SD103, which is the heritage topic paper. And so
Yes, sorry, what was the heritage topic paper reference again?
SD103. So obviously the purpose of 59G is to look at how this new settlement would affect purposes. So, and you'll see that conveniently we have virtually everything says it will have minor to significant harm. We don't know where the new proposal, according to the council, falls within that very broad range. But if you look at the element of compactness, We have there a finding of minor significant harm. I don't really want to...
So if you bear with me, are you taking me to a specific page?
That is page 38, sir. Sorry, Mr. Alvin, I'm
PDF page 47.
47?
It's print page 38.
All right, I'm sorry.
PDF page, it's the electronic page numbering, slightly different.
Okay, I have that, thank you.
So we have that. I don't really want to... compactness, we have some minor disagreements on, but really, if you go to landmark monuments criterion 2, you'll see the reference to the Minster Way. And so this proposal, as you'll probably be aware, is situated, the Minster Way runs around the boundary, the northern boundary of this site, sir, and it's a very important recreational route. And so that it is also, I'm sorry, I should have got my, it is a very important recreational route, which is actually highlighted as, I'm sorry, I've got my references wrong, which is actually specifically referred to in the heritage topic paper, so as being a very important part of the setting and character of York. And that, of course, sir, is the fundamental purpose. I'll let you read that at your leisure, sir. Then, sir, so again, what we have here is a document which isn't taking on board the weight which is placed on this particular feature by their own heritage topic paper. And so, but more importantly, we get to landscape and setting, sir. Again, if you look at what landscape and setting, the heritage topic paper, very importantly, sir, one of the most important parts of landscape setting are the views out from the outer ring road, not just views in towards the urban core. We say those will be substantially affected by this proposal, both by seeing the housing development and, sir, more importantly, by the effects of the off-site road infrastructure. And so that again is picked up in the heritage topic paper and isn't actually carried forward in this appraisal. And so again, if you look at the heritage topic paper, one of the main character elements is open countryside and greenbelt. And two major items, well, a number of major items here which are relevant, sir. Obviously, the open countryside surrounding York, but more specifically on this proposal, as an important key feature is airfields with large expanse of openness, cultural heritage, habitat value, village settings, and long-distance uninterrupted recreation routes with cultural significance through the countryside. And then examples of these key features which need to be protected for setting. You have Elvington Airfield, the Minster Way, and interestingly enough, Sir, Hessington Golf Course, which again will be affected by the off-site, the views out from that will be affected by the off-site road infrastructure. And again, the significance, under the heading of significance, we have Elvington Airfield again referenced, halfway down, sir. And sir, none of that is actually particularly picked up under landscape and setting in the in 59G, so there's no recognition of the airfield as an important key feature of the landscape and setting of York. And so then we have, under purpose 3, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Where only minor to significant harm is found. So that beggars belief. Whatever may be the need which may justify this proposal, to find that only minor significant harm can be caused by a proposal which leads to, I can't remember the latest figure now put forward, I think it's, the figure I've used is 159 hectares, I think it's now cited as 164 hectares of open countryside, so being lost to development. That must be significant harm. It may be outweighed by the need for the development, but it must be significant harm to purpose 4. Particularly, sir.
Sorry, was that purpose 3?
That is purpose 3, sir. Safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Indeed, sir, we are told at the end of that, it's considered that in the HIA that significant minor harm effects for the allocation boundary could be reduced to minor, subject to implementation of appropriate mitigation and treatment landscape. So you can actually obviously landscape around, you can plant trees around any development. So that does not mitigate the loss of over 160 hectares of open countryside. And so that document, 59G, makes no assessment of the impacts upon the greenbelt of the off-site road infrastructure. And so I know I've referred to it to you before, neither does the SA. So we say that that's a major deficiency in the Council's evidence base. And so that is not just our view. We note that, I don't know, we don't know what Historic England are saying, but this is the impacts of this off-site road infrastructure has been a matter which has been raised by Historic England. And so just to repeat what that off-site road infrastructure seems to consist, because again, it seems to be changing, sir. We have of course, the Great Separated Junction, which will have a substantial detrimental impact upon the area both north and south of the A64, but obviously the area to the north is shown by figure 3.1 of the local plan as being important to the rural setting of York. You have a 1.5 kilometre access road, sir, from ST15 northwards to the grade separated junction. You have, sir, now proposed a new road between the grade separated junction and the university, which again runs through the figure 3.1 area, which again will have a substantial impact upon the character of that area. And so you have, I think, a 1.4 kilometre road running from the ST15 to Elvington Lane. We say, sir, that all those roads will probably need lighting, or that new highway infrastructure will need lighting. And certainly, sir, the council itself in its documentation accepts that the route, the footpath cycleway along Long Lane and Common Lane will need to be lit. Because obviously it would be clearly unsafe for pedestrians and cyclists to use it otherwise. But we think the likelihood is that all those new roads will have to be lit given the volumes of traffic that will be using them and to make them safe for pedestrians and cyclists. And so that will have a major impact upon the character of the landscape between Elvington, Heslington and Fulford. It will completely change the character of that open landscape, which at the present moment is one of the most attractive and tranquil around York at the present moment, and which is well used for recreational, for informal countryside recreation, because it's crisscrossed with public rights of way. And so can I, in that regard, sir, direct you to MPPF paragraph 123, so last bullet point, which says that planning policies should aim to identify and protect areas of tranquility which have remained relatively undisturbed by noise and are prized for their recreational and amenity value for this reason. And so we say that this countryside south between Heslington, Fulford and Elvington falls very squarely within that definition. And we note, sir, that the council has made no attempt to comply with paragraph 123 by identifying areas of tranquility. So, sir, our conclusion, so I read, our conclusion, sir, is that the CYC evidence greatly underestimates the impact of this development allocation upon the purposes of the Greenbelt, and in particular upon openness, because all this new road infrastructure in particular will have a highly urbanising impact upon the countryside and will, as I've said, change its character. And so we think it will do so to an extent that it will fundamentally undermine the purpose of the York Greenbelt in this location. So can I just deal very briefly with nature conservation? I claim no expertise in this field whatsoever. But it seems fairly apparent to me, sir, that the issue, sir, is we are leading to a loss of a designated SNCI, sir, a substantial damage to an SNCI, sir. I think it's 46 hectares directly of the SNCI and 10 hectares lost to the access road. I think those are the figures quoted by LDP. And so we say that OS 10 isn't adequate compensation or mitigation for that, sir. And so I go back to my initial point. SS1 is to deal with where site allocations are. Mitigation and compensation under GI2 doesn't deal with location of new allocations, so it's to deal with development coming forward after planning adoption. And what SS1 actually says is you should avoid developing SNCI, sir. We also think, sir, that there will be a highly detrimental impact upon the Tilmire SSI. So this is only 1 kilometre from the site, the SSI, which is important. So its main importance, as I understand it, is for ground breeding birds. It is only 1 kilometre from SD15. It will be the nearest and most convenient area for people to take dogs to from this development. And so there is already substantial problems, I know, sir, from the amount of signage on that area of dogs troubling ground breeding birds during the breeding season. That will be massively increased. So I can only, and I've seen no evidence from the council how that problem will be dealt with, because it will be a very convenient location for visitors. And I'm troubled, sir, that we have no representations from Natural England on that point. Given that they're concerned on Strensford Common on almost identical point. So then turning to viability and deliverability. So I do note that we do actually have some, the Statement of Common Ground does actually give some more information on this, and I have to say that I prepared what to say before I actually seen that. But so as I understand it, there are 3 potential ownerships here. As from the Statement of Common Ground, language in there is opaque, sir. I think it's probably opaque for a reason. Although they all agree that they would very much like to have an allocation on this land, there's yet no formal agreement among them to pursue it as a single development, and very critically, sir, with an intention to equalise development value. So before I retired, I was involved in these sorts of things quite regularly, and such agreement is absolutely essential to bring forward a complex site like this. So when I did one of these some years ago in front of one of your fellow inspectors, he was very keen to know whether such agreement was in place to ensure deliverability. And obviously it's a very simple question which LDP can answer. So in terms of viability, that position seems to have changed remarkably quickly in terms of LDP's position. But viability depends very much on getting two factors right. So one is what are the abnormal costs on the development? And secondly, sir, what is an appropriate rate of development? Because that goes, what kills these developments in terms of viability is interest charges on infrastructure which you have to put in front of development. How long do you have to sustain that interest before you make a return on it? So we do have costs from the Council and LDP. We have no idea how those costs have been calculated, what they are based upon. In many cases, we should have 5 million put in for very different things. We say, sir, that those costs you need